Welcome to the Private Lender Podcast with your hosts from Hard Money Bankers, Jason Balin and Chris Haddon. This podcast is sponsored by hardmoneymastermind.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Private Lender Podcast. Thanks for being with us. What's up, Jay?
What's up? What's up?
Today we are talking about, okay, so there's an old, let me start that a different way. There's an old lending adage that says that the smallest loans have the biggest problems. And we have been experiencing this for many years, not like in a horrible way, but like, something you just learn over time. You do enough deals, you see how they perform, where these deals are, who the borrowers are, how they work out. And after you do a few thousand, you start to learn a thing or two, right? And something that we see and try to avoid all the time with our lending here in DC, Maryland, Virginia, also with our business partners in PA and Jersey. Man, when you're talking about lower dollar areas, like, in our situations, you're talking maybe 150,000, maybe 200K ARVs. And that's not always like a rough area, depending on where you are in the country. In many places, it's going to be these days. 150, 200K for residential houses is, pretty cheap for most of America. And the folks who are buying there and how things work out and how people perform can create so many more headaches than if you are in a different area with, in the suburbs with 400K properties and we're doing $250,000 loans, and how those perform and how predictable and easy and just better those work out.
Yeah, well, I think when you said the word headache, I think that sums up a lot of this, because it doesn't necessarily mean that the deals aren't going to, in the long run, perform and pay off. It just means that you're going to have a lot of headaches along the way. And it depends if that's something that you want to deal with. Think about real estate investing, relate lending to real estate investing in general. A lot of real estate investors, they start on smaller asset classes, smaller price point properties where they need a smaller amount of money, maybe Class C areas. And over time, they work their way up. They work into B areas or A neighborhoods, or they do bigger projects because they realize when they do bigger projects, not only can they make more money, but also they're dealing with more sophisticated operators and vendors and attorneys and appraisers and real estate agents and investors and colleagues and things like that. So it ends up being easier and better in the future. So a few things related to smaller price point properties. So first things first, let's just look at dollars and cents. So if you're willing to lend 65% of the after repair value of a property, and let's say the after repair value of the property is $100,000, and you lend 65% of that, up to 65% of that, you have $35,000 in equity, in real equity cushion in case of a default. Now, let's say you do a $300,000 property and you do the same 65%. That loan's $195,000, right? So you have $105,000 of equity, right? So percentage-wise, the numbers are the same, right? The formula, the metrics is the same. But in real life, in the real world,
in real dollars,
in real dollars, you have $100,000 of loss mid equity to potentially collect on, or that you could go against it, compared to $35,000. If you have a $65,000 loan amount on a $100,000 property and that thing goes into default, chances are, you're going to get yourself in trouble. That's going to eat up a lot of that equity very, very, very quickly.
Something else on that note and on this topic that I was thinking about when we were discussing the topic earlier and said we were going to record the podcast a little bit later on, is the fact that a lot of people go into lending, and we've seen this with some people before too, that they think that higher loan amounts are more risk because more capital is being deployed. And I get that. I get that there is more capital being deployed. I see why some people would associate that with a higher risk level. However, it's just not how it works out. It's just not how it works out from experience, right?
And the reason why I think people think that's more risk, and I get it, Because let's say you have $100,000 deal that goes completely sideways and bad, it would absolutely suck, but a lot of people could swallow stroking a check for 100 grand or doing something to pay it off. And then let's say it's $1 million deal that goes bad, that's a different story.
Sure. But in reality, it's just not the way they play out. And you underwrite them correctly, obviously. I mean, like any deal that you do, but just how it plays out in real life is very, a lot of this has to do with borrower quality too. So not only like dollars and equity and all that, the fact of the matter is that in lower dollar areas are where lower quality borrowers operate. Okay. And something about a lower quality real estate investor is that when things go sideways, we've seen this 100 times. When things go sideways, they don't know how to get out of a sticky situation. They don't know how to get out of it. They don't know how to operate because they're lower quality in what they do. And why are they in lower dollar areas? Because they are lower quality. It just all goes together. And when they get into a default situation, they don't know how to get out of it. And somebody who's of higher quality, it's uncommon for those people to get into default, but it does happen on occasion. And when you take a higher quality person, a higher quality real estate investor who gets into a default situation just because something happened, whatever it may be, they know what to do. They know how. They're like, okay, can I refinance this situation? No, I'm not in a position to refinance because I'm in default. This is not going to work. I got to dump the property. What's it worth? How can I get rid of it? They operate their way out of it. Lower quality people, they just shut the door and hide under the bed, throw their hands up, be like, I don't know what to do. Or just hang on to something unrealistic in business. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've heard, oh, I'm going to refinance this property to pay off. I don't want to sell. I get this weird fixation on I have to hold on to this investment property. I can't sell it, even though they're in default. And when they're in default, they can't refinance. And I tell them that, but they don't believe me because they're in default with me. So they think I'm lying to them. And they just get weird. They make poor business decisions and get oddly fixated on holding this property, which just turns to nothing, finance out of it. But it's not working. So you got to do something different. And they usually don't believe me. They rarely take my advice.
Well, it's kind of like a domino effect. They're less sophisticated, and because of it, they just don't have the experience. Like they might believe that they're trying to do the right thing, but they don't know what the right thing is. And it's a domino effect because I'll give you an example. Like, say somebody buys a property for $40,000. You want to make money on a flip. Right? That's a lot of rehabbers try to strive for, is like 20% base of profit. So let's say, they're buying a $40,000 property. They're putting $20,000 into it to try to make 10 grand or something like that, right? The reason that they're buying that property is because that's probably the only the amount of cash and liquidity they have, the only capabilities they have to do it at that point, right? Because they haven't created, they don't have enough liquid reserves yet to bigger projects yet. Everyone needs a stepping stone. I certainly understand that. But the problem is the smaller deals, they have less of their own capital into the deal. And you know what happens? If they have less skin in the game, they have, less to risk than somebody who has more skin in the game, right? Like they can walk away with it because let's say you make them bring 30% into the deal. Like they might only need 20 grand. 20 grand is just not enough. That doesn't get them fully vested into the deal on some of these as it could on a larger loan amount. Now I understand a lot of you listening to this podcast or watching this podcast live in different areas of the country. And it doesn't matter what part, like you can almost take loan amount out of this and a little bit area out of it, lift a little bit, but you got to be operating in median housing price neighborhoods first. That median housing price neighborhood might be $100,000. It might be $300,000. It might be $600,000, whatever it is. Median housing price neighborhoods is obviously the most important because that's where the real investors are, doing deals. They're buying, they're flipping houses for a starter home for a family or a move up house for a family. So whatever that median housing price neighborhood is, that's where you need to be. If your average ARV in your neighborhood, because it's a median housing price is 100,000, by all means do 100,000 and stay away from the $40,000 ARV because you want to be in the median housing price neighborhoods. Those typically get hit the least over time. High-end properties get hit hard. Condos and high condo association fees co-op, stuff like that get hit hard. Lower price neighborhoods typically get hard in economic downturns. So the point being, like, you don't just have to do $300,000 ARV loans. That's not what we're saying. We're just saying be in median housing price neighborhoods. And, if your average area is $100,000, then do it off that. You want to be where sophisticated real estate investors are investing, where there's a lot of investors are investing, and you want to make sure they have skin in the game. If someone's got to put 30% down on a $300,000 purchase, that's almost $100,000. If they got to put 30% down on a $100,000 purchase, it's only $30,000, right? So like, do the math. Like, it's somewhat common sense of like, who's going to be more vested in this property? The person putting up 30,000 or the person putting 100,000. And that's not to say that you should stay away from one-off, like newer real estate investors just starting to do deals. We do a lot of loans for real estate investors that are just starting to do deals, but they're in the right areas, right? They're in the right areas. They have enough skin in the game. They're vested in these deals. They understand the market, and you start working in areas that just don't have high values. The borrowers potentially don't have the best credit. They don't have a lot of cash to contribute into the deal. The construction costs are high relative to the after repair value. It's a disaster. There's a lot of things kind of ticking away where there's risks. And here's another thing to really keep in mind related to construction costs. Let's say it costs $120,000 to renovate, depending on where you're at, if you're in the city or if you're in the suburbs, and depending on what market you're in. Let's say it costs $120,000 to renovate whatever, 1,500 square foot property. Could be a row house, could be a townhouse, could be a small single family, whatever it is. If it costs $120,000 to do that cost, it's going to cost that if the ARV is $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. It's the same cost, right? It's going to cost, for the most part, the same amount to do so. So when you start messing with big construction projects on properties with low after repair values, you could really get yourself in trouble, because they could be halfway through the project and all of a sudden everything's completely messed up and they got to do a lot more work. And that after repair value just isn't going to support doing that. It's only so high it can go. So when you're in the $300,000 price point or the $400,000 price points, that's a really good sweet spot to be in, because even if a borrower botches a project completely, there's typically breathing room to kind of get them out of it.
That's an interesting point. So you could put $100K into a property that would only raise the value $50K because the neighborhood's capped out potentially, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's the reason why a lot of lenders don't lend in Baltimore City, although the values have really gone up a lot recently over the last few years, but before, because the replacement costs were higher than the after repair value.
Than the values of the property. Yeah.
On these things. There's a a 4,000 square foot house that traded at $150,000 in good condition. You can't rebuild. The land value is nothing. That was very
you can't rebuild it.
And a lot of parts of the country in different, have different submarkets that potentially have that as well. They have nice, beautiful houses, but they're capped at the value, right? So look at it like this. If you're buying a property that's worth $150,000 ARV and it's a big house, like, you get yourself in trouble real quick with construction, because the construction could cost more than what the value of the house costs.
Yeah. Also, one other caveat I want to throw in here before we wrap up is that we aren't hating on small loans necessarily. It's more small dollar property values. You can do a $50K, like we'll do a $50K loan on a $250,000 asset in a median housing price neighborhood. We do it all the time. Like somebody, just needs to borrow money to finish it, or maybe like it's just a straight cash out refi bridge loan. Like, we aren't hating on small loan amounts, and we do them, whereas some lenders don't. So it's not necessarily that. It's more just like the low dollar areas and the weaker borrowers we're talking about that get you into problems. You're not going to have more risk if you're doing better areas, higher loan amounts, and better areas and better borrowers.
This is also a headache conversation and a bigger problem conversation than don't ever do those deals ever. Like, if you look at most private lenders' portfolios, just like real estate investors, just like we started this podcast, they start in C areas and they work their way up to B areas or A areas, and then they don't look back, right? Because they're higher deals, and potentially they're making more money in those areas, but they have less headaches. Like, a lot of people want to trade, time for money when, like early on, a lot of people want to save money and spend the time on it. So they don't mind if the deals have headaches. But we'll tell you from experience that, keep in mind, deals that have headaches, it's not just a headache on your end. It's going to be a headache on your private capital end as well, because potentially if you're the lender on it yourself, you're going to have the headaches. If you have a private capital investor who's investing, co-lending with you on this deal, you're going to have a headache, and they're going to have a headache because they're like, why does this borrower keep missing payments? Why do they go over the term? Why haven't they got the work done quick enough? Things like that. You don't want those headaches. None of us got into this business to have to deal with those headaches. So from our experience, the smaller the deals in some certain neighborhoods end up having bigger problems and more headaches. Do we lose money on those deals? Absolutely not. At the end of the day, a year and a half later, do they perform when it's all said and done? Yeah, we typically recoup everything. But there's headaches along the way, and not everybody wants to deal with the headaches. So there's no need to put yourself in that situation if you can prevent it by, like we talk about, market. Spend your effort on finding better quality deals that are going to perform. I like to put my money, and I know Chris does too, and I know our capital investors, I want to lend my money to good borrowers, to good people that are going to perform, going to make their payments, going to keep a very easy transaction. And I want to rinse and repeat that over and over and over and over. I don't want to put my capital or our investor capital into deals that are going to have headaches that I'm going to have to pick up the phone and call them to figure out where their monthly payment is, or did they get their permit in, or this or that. Nobody wants to deal with those headaches. That's what this is about.
Sure don't. All right, guys, that's it for today for the Private Lenders Podcast. If you haven't done so already, head over to hardmoneymastermind.com. Check it out, join the conversation, and we will see you in there. You guys have a good day.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast. Please note that the opinions stated by all the speakers on this show are only opinions and not legal, financial, or accounting advice. Please make sure to always check with your own legal, accounting, and financial professionals. If you'd enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast, we'd appreciate it if you spread the word. Make sure to check out hardmoneymastermind.com, the #1 free community for new and experienced